Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Older Queer Voices podcast. I'm Raga D'silva, your host for today. This podcast is a space where we honor the lives, histories, struggles, and triumphs of older LGBTQ plus people whose stories deserve to be heard, remembered, and celebrated. Today, I'm deeply honored to be joined by Femi Otitoju. Femi is a prominent activist of over 40 years, a diversity specialist, community organizer, and a powerful voice within the UK's Black LGBTQ plus community. Femi made history as the first out Black lesbian to talk openly about being a lesbian on UK television in 1983. Femi is also the founder of Challenge Consultancy, a leading provider of diversity and inclusion training and consulting services. She's a former chair of Switchboard and Women's Aid and currently serves as chair of Queerwell, the LGBTQ plus mental health charity. Femi's life and work sit at the intersection of race, sexuality, activism, belonging, and survival. Her journey spans decades of social change, resistance, visibility, and community building. And today, we have the absolute privilege of hearing some of those reflections and experiences firsthand. So, Femi, thank you so much. And a huge, warm, hot London welcome.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is seriously hot. It'll be weird if people are watching this in the winter, won't it? So forgive me if I kind of like wipe off every now and again.
Yeah, and same here to the audience who's listening to us today. If you find me coughing or sneezing, it's just because of the London cold. It's making the rounds. And I am super, super hot as well. So, Femi, but we're going to have a really warm conversation anyway. So, I want us to start at the start, as I always do. I want you to take us on a journey, Femi, for our audience who may have heard of you lots and who may never have heard of you. So, where does your story begin?
I think my story begins way back in 1958 when my mother packed her baby, her 6-month-old baby, and left Nigeria for London. And like a lot of West Africans, in particular Nigerians who are in the UK to study, as she was studying law, she got a foster mother for me. So that was not through social services, it was a private arrangement. She advertised in The Lady. And I'm telling you about that because that woman, Avril Standing, as she was called at the time, I think was the one who made it possible for me to be the out lesbian that I've been for most of my life. And that's because she was a white woman. We were in a little town in Sussex called Worthing. And she looked at this little black child that she'd been given to look up. I mean, sometime later, by the time I kind of was aware of it, I was about 10 or 11. She looked at me and she said, now then, almost anything that you do that's not right, people are going to blame on the fact that you're black or coloured, as they said in those days. So don't take any notice of them. There's nothing wrong with you. You're completely fine. Anything you need to do in this world, you'll do. If it's meant to come, as they say, if it's meant to come to you, it'll come to you. Now, of course, that isn't actually true. But by the time I realised it wasn't true, it was too late. I'd already believed it. So she made it possible for me to be different, the only black kid of my age in that town, and still be okay. And so later on in life, when I was different in another way, the only lesbian in lots of different environments, I remembered that it's okay to be different. You can still do it. And so it stood me in really good stead.
So what does that thing mean? The word different mean? How did you know you were different, and in what way did you feel you were different?
Um, I think I knew I was different in visible ways, obviously, with my colour. I understood little things like pubescing earlier than most of my friends. I think that's probably biology. I remember, and therefore quite early, working out where my attraction lay to other people, and that it wasn't two boys, it was two girls. And I just sort of shrugged and thought, oh, well, here's another way in which I'm different, never mind.
Yeah.
It just meant not being part of what everybody else was expected to do.
But I've had conversations with many from that time, from many people, and most of them say that they felt different. They felt a certain kind of fear because you didn't know how you were going to fit in. So did you see yourself as someone who was different and didn't know how you would fit in, or did you just feel the confidence that comes across even today?
I think I can genuinely say that I accepted the difference as just part of me and wasn't particularly worried about it. I understood that a level of discretion was needed around it, in the same way that I learned to what we would call now code switch. As someone from outside the majority culture, I understood that most of my friends who were girls were, having crushes on boy band people, and I kind of played along with that for a bit. And I understood that we were supposed to look around for boys that we fancied, and I thought, well, that one's got a motorbike and some white leathers. That seems quite fun. Maybe I'll go after that one. But I didn't really feel the need to not be who I was.
Excellent. I think that makes you quite an exception. I haven't met too many people like you, really, Femi, and I think that's brilliant for us to hear about positive stories as well, especially at a time when there was no language for
Yeah,
this, right? So how did you?
exactly.
Yeah. So how did you? I'm just trying to understand, because when there was no language for this, there's no word for this. How did you then know who you were?
Oh, there were words, there was language, there was the Encyclopedia Britannica, and there were scientists, Havelock Ellis, who talked about inverts. There were definitely words. Some of them were confusing, because I thought inverts had to wear brogues and tweed, and that really wasn't me. I did like a nice frock. So there were words, there was language. I wasn't always willing to apply that language to myself. I think I just hung around waiting for everybody to catch up. I think I just thought, the time will come. And the time did come, because when I left school, just before I left school, my best friend came out to me. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. I didn't actually say me too, because, you don't want to steal someone's thunder. And also, we're not the same. So I hung around a little bit longer, and eventually she said, we want to go to this place. I'd like to go to this conference. What do you think? I said, oh, a women's liberation conference. That sounds great. I'll come with you to that. And then we went. And before we went, she said, I want to talk to you. We're going to go to this feminist conference. There's going to be discussions about all sorts of things, including sexuality and lesbianism. And I just want you to know that I'm a lesbian. And I thought, at last, there is somebody. Didn't do much with it, but it was really nice to know. And it was brilliant that it was my best friend.
Yeah. And did you come out to her as well at some point?
At some point, yes. Not very long later.
Okay.
Not very long later. Sorry, I'm so hot. It's crazy.
Okay, same here. I'm just.
It's like some terrible film show. Anyway, so we went off to these conferences, and then as a result of that, we got involved in consciousness raising groups, women's liberation consciousness raising groups. There were other lesbians, old ones. Some of them were nearly 30, and so I was able after that to kind of go along to women's clubs and things like that, and eventually I did come out. Yes.
Okay, so are we talking about the 70s now or the 80s?
Yes, we're in sort of 1978, something like that.
Okay, so the late 70s. So can you describe the landscape to me and for our viewers? How was it for the gay community here?
In one way, it was quite difficult in that there was very little representation of ourselves in, say, the mainstream media, on television and radio and newspapers, even then, nothing positive. On the other hand, for me, there were lesbian clubs, albeit in basements or around the back of somewhere or on the top floor with, a need to kind of understand what was going on. But there were women-only spaces where, and at one point, by the time we got to the early 80s, there were spaces where you could go at any evening during the week and know, in London, and not all cities were like that, obviously, but I could go to places and know that I would be surrounded by lesbians from 6 o'clock in the evening till whatever time. So I could go on the way home from work, or, it was lovely.
So how did you know about these spaces at that time? Because, there was no social media, there was no WhatsApp.
No, wasn't it awful? No, well, first of all, we knew each other and we had these groups. Secondly, we had things like the Women's Liberation newsletter, which was published every month, and any nice events that were going on there. So I volunteered on the Women's Liberation newsletter and did that. So we'd it was all done by hand. Of course, it was all typed up and then photocopied and then stapled and taken to the post office. But we knew about that. There were miraculous things called telephone trees, which came a bit later with campaigns where I agree to phone these 10 women if you phone me and tell me about something. So everything sort of got around that way. And we clustered in certain areas. I was so lucky that when my mother went back to Nigeria in 77, she left me in Hackney, the place with the highest concentration of lesbians in Europe at that time. I don't know how they know. I don't know who counted them, but I was very pleased that they were there.
So I'm trying to again build that picture for our audience. So how did you date at that time? Now you have Tinder and you have Hinge. So how did dating happen?
We used to have a little saying in my little group of friends, which is that we don't want you taking up with any woman when you don't have references from at least 2 previous lovers. We sometimes say, it was less of a community, more of a rota. We were small sets of communities in different bits of London, and we socialised in very small pools, and so you met friends through friends or family and things like that. It was interesting that, particularly when you add to that the fact that as a Black lesbian, that pool, if you were into only dating people who had a similar demographic to yourself, then your pool was extremely small.
Okay, and so you navigated that, and I'm just going to bring you in the present 2026.
Okay.
I would say, so that's the date. I'm going to talk about dating a bit because Nicola and I were once invited to be on a Tinder campaign. And we had a young person there with us on a campaign, Amy Spalding. She's from the reality show I Kissed a Girl, I think.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So we were just sharing notes about dating, and we were saying like how we dated. We would call each other or we would write a note to each other, and I would say, okay, we're going to meet you, say, in June, 30th of June at this place at this time. And that's it. There were no follow-ups. You just somehow turned up at the date. And then if you didn't like the person for whatever reason, you didn't get along, you didn't ghost them. You had a way of letting them know that, sorry, but this doesn't, work for me. And, so
you're a better person than me, I think, because we had a way of dating too. So this friend would meet that friend in this place. But, if you said, okay, I'll meet you outside the Odeon at 6:30 to go and see whatever was on at the time, you'd go around the corner, and if you saw her standing there and you didn't like the look of her, well, ghosting was still possible.
That is news to me. I haven't dated for 20 years, so I don't know how it works. But when you look at the current generation, the wonderful generation that we have now, do you see any similarities or do you see that it is different? But you said you've already spoken about ghosting, but do you see anything different? It's just that the tools have changed, but we are the same.
I think, the conduits have changed. The language has changed. Ghosting wasn't a thing, but you could stand someone up, or let them down, either one of those things. I see that difference, the mechanisms, the way in which we meet one another. I think also there's a difference between, certainly for me, around the way in which we applied our politics to our relationships. That might still be the case, but I see there's a lot more blurring. But the places I used to go to, the feminists went to one place, and the bar dykes went to other places, and they're the twain, or very occasionally.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to explain, what does the bar dyke mean when you say a bar dyke?
Well, I suppose it's about the routes that we took to the way in which we lived with our sexuality and the way in which we socialized. So for me, I think my lesbianism came to the fore through my politics, in that I was able to live that life because I was connected with those types of women. I think for other women, perhaps they met women in a different way, and so their social life was more around the social scene, clubs, alcohol, fashion trends like punk and so on, music as well. So, we arrive in the same place, which is in bed with a woman, but we get there through all these different ways.
How interesting. So when did Femi become an activist? Did it evolve? Did you evolve into being an activist?
Yes, I think I evolved into becoming an activist because the people that I and particularly the women that I was engaged with, were activists. And because we talked about the things that were unfair, what made it difficult for us. Why were lesbians so poorly served compared to the way in which gay men were poorly served? Well, it's because there was a gap in the earnings between men and women. And so 2 lesbians have less income than 2 gay men. So, if that clicks with you, you could just go out and have another beer. Or you could go, no, that's not okay. I'm going to start joining the campaign for equal pay. You could say that some of it was actually literally about the way in which services were provided. That there are fewer venues for us, so we want to fight for more venues. So, yeah, I think that one comes to your position, whether that's political or otherwise, through your experiences, and that was the case for me.
Sure. And did you follow your mother's profession or education in terms
My
of
mother
law?
did law.
Law, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do law.
Okay.
I had intended to go to university and do biomedical science. That was my dream. I was going to go off to Warwick and have this great time. And then my mother left the UK. So I'd done my A-levels in 77. She left in 77. As far as she was concerned, her job was done. That one had a university place. It needed to go over and take it. But you see, this was the time that I'd found all these lesbians in London. Well, I'm not going to leave London and leave all these lesbians behind here. So I didn't go to uni. So I wandered into an employment agency and said, I've done sciences, what can I do? And they said, you can do nursing. I thought, okay, that'll do. It comes with accommodation and various other things. I'll go and do that. Look at both of us.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
so, I did nursing for about 4 months, I think. And I decided the NHS was not a good place to be a young Black woman in the late 70s. And I met a man, and he's the first of many who just gave me that little step up. I met a man who worked in the pathology lab, and he said, you've got sciences, why don't you come and work in the path lab? Instantly, I had a white coat instead of a nurse's uniform. Suddenly, I'm treated respectfully in the hospital, more respectfully than I have been then. I thought, okay, maybe this will work. Maybe I'll just be a path lab person. But it didn't fit. It didn't. The NHS. Everywhere I looked, I saw people who looked like me at the lowest levels. Actually, people like me and women from Ireland in the nursing profession at that time. We were all in this kind of shoved into this particular group. So back I went to an employment agency and got a job in an employment agency. And there I met a man called Andy Picos, who said, why don't you come work on Switchboard as a volunteer? So I'd had all this sort of feminist stuff and activism on the side of working with women, working in women's centres, doing things like, pregnancy testing for women who thought they might be pregnant, supporting women who are fleeing domestic violence, just legal advice for people having a hard time at work, but women's stuff, right? So I've been doing all of that, working with lesbians. And then I met Andy, and he said, come and join Switchboard. So now I started doing lesbian and gay stuff over there. So, now my path, my 2 different kind of catalysts, if it were, come together. So I've been a feminist activist, now as LGBT, we were lesbian and gay then, lesbian and gay activist. And so that kept me pretty busy.
Yeah. And tell us about 1983 then, when you were the first out Black lesbian to talk on television. And
yeah, I mean, I think there were some pictures of lesbians, I think, when there was a program about the Gateways Club and so on. But in terms of actually getting a chance to talk about one's own life, about the position for lesbians generally and looking forward, I think that was probably the first one. So that program was called Claire Rayner's Casebook. Okay. And Claire Rayner used to investigate. She'd do these, I think, half-hour programs talking about social issues. There was a guy called, a very well-known man called Tom Robinson, who was part of that program, and myself. We were interviewed by Claire, and I was asked questions like, how did you know? What does that mean for you? What do you think the future looks like? And she was very good, Claire Rayner. I was curiously at home in that program. Yeah, I was. And I think I'd been very well prepared through all those meetings where I'd sat around with those feminists in the early days, where we'd sat around fiercely agreeing with one another. So I had a lot of sort of positions already set out
Sure.
because I'd listened to others.
Sure. So I'm curious to know, do you remember what you said? What would the future look like for you?
I remember using a phrase which now everyone would associate with an advertising campaign, because Claire said to me, "What do you think the future's like?" And I think I said, "I think it's very bright."
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I was endlessly. I don't know. Some people would say I was naive, and looking at what's happening around Section 28 and so on, you might say I was naive. I wasn't, because it is better now than it was then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's again like in 1983, when a young person is asked what does the future look like, and you're saying it looks bright. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Now in 2026, do you think that felt that the future was bright and is bright?
I think the future was absolutely bright. I mean, it was rocky. There were successes and there were pitfalls, whatever. And I'll always think that I have incredible belief in the power of women to organise and to find ways to collaborate with others. I've always done it. And even if we struggle sometimes and we have to fight for this, my days of feminism involved watching mostly. Women having to fight for the right to define their own sexuality within feminist circles, within lesbian feminist conferences. We had to deal with people saying that class was the true struggle, and if we wanted people to talk about race, and they were diluting the struggle. And then I had to go into places that were supposedly anti-racist, run mostly by Black people, where they were saying, well, this sexuality thing really isn't our thing. You shouldn't be bringing that into this forum. So I think that, there will always be stumbling blocks, but there will always be progress.
Yeah. So I love the lens that you look through. Basically, you look at everything as bright. And I think maybe that is why you've been this activist who's actually brought change. I feel that every time I was researching you for the last 2 months, by the way, on various things, because, I've been following your work quite closely. I've heard our friend Tim talk about you. I've heard our friend DJ Ritu talk about you. And everybody comes with this huge amount of amazing stories about you. So I started researching. Who is this Femi that everybody talks about? And I think for me, the commonality, the consistency was that you have always looked at things in a very positive manner. And I think it is so important for us as a community to remember that as well as we sit and speak. Yes, things are dark sometimes. They are quite dark at times. But we have to remember that this is it. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep walking. So that brings me to our next question on Section 28.
Yes.
How was it for you during that time when you're doing all this fight and you're looking at a bright future, and then this happens?
Well, you see, the thing is, Section 28 started at a place where I actually was and where I was working. So I was working in the London Borough of Haringey in the Lesbian and Gay unit. And that's really where it all began, I think. I'd like to think it was somewhere else, but honestly, we, as a unit, there were 6 officers and various other support workers. And our role was to support the borough with its initiatives to portray positive images of lesbians and gay men in all its services, including education. So as soon as we started that work with schools, we got a backlash from various members of the community and, of course, some elected councillors on the council itself. So how was it for me at that time? Well, the same way it was, I'm sure, for everybody else, both in that unit and in the community in Haringey and in the wider community. It was infuriating, almost incredible. We couldn't believe that we got as far as we had with all the work that had been done by the Greater London Council previously, with a whole dedicated lesbian and gay unit being set up in the local authority. And now here we were facing a community backlash. And what was particularly annoying for me was that in Haringey, people were saying that the pro-lesbian and gay stance that the council had taken was racist because there weren't lesbians and gay men in the minority ethnic communities, and Haringey had a very big, and by the time you added up all the African descent, the Caribbean descent, the Greek, Turkish, we were the majority, probably not the minority. So they were basically saying that most of the community in Haringey wouldn't support it because we were from racially minoritized groups, and of course that was hogwash. And all that did was galvanize us more. So we started running off to these various places, off to the Cypriot Centre, hello, do you know us? Off to the Asian Centre, hello, support us. And so we responded. Was it difficult times? Yes. What did we do? We banded together and took it on.
Sure. Was it challenging at that time to meet other people, other gay women, to date with all this hanging over your head?
I think no, actually, because we're all out on the streets now. We have banners waving and whatever. We're doing all these things. Now, I'm sure, and I know that for some people it became a more difficult time. You know, if you were a teacher or a youth worker, or even almost in any sort of public service, working in a care home, I'm sure it became more difficult because people weren't sure what this new piece of proposed legislation would mean and whether they could talk about our issues in the workplace. But for those of us who were already out up front and centre and who were trying to create change, in a way, we saw more of each other. You know, there were more meetings, more campaigns, more marches.
Good. So is it at this time that you decided that you're going to start up a consultancy, or did that come much later?
No, that came to almost exactly that time because there was the abolition of the Great London Council was facing abolition. Several of the lesbian and gay units in local authorities, Manchester, Birmingham, Camden, Islington, were looking at what they should be doing with these specific units they had set up. And it was thought in some boroughs, and Haringey was one of them, that they would bring them, you know, the Irish unit, the disability unit, bring them together into one equality unit, or at least most of them, or that the numbers in each of those units would be reduced. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, don't worry, Femi, you'll be fine. You've worked in the women's unit in the GLC. You know, you've worked in the lesbian and gay unit in Haringey. You can go and work in the race unit, couldn't you, if it gets abolished?" And I thought, oh, for heaven's sake, it's like all these different little compartments. And I know, even before that term intersectionality, as coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, even before that became sort of common parlance, I thought I need to be able to bring these different bits of me and my work together. And so, yes. And Haringey as a borough, which is the borough I chose to work in, the borough I chose to live in because of its politics, was again utterly fabulous around my explanation of why I was leaving the unit and what I needed to do. Very supportive, and just said, well, you know, why don't you take a little bit of leave, see how you get on, if that's working, and if not, come back and talk to us. So I'd like to say that I think that those senior officers were great, and like so many times, I was supported by white men, who helped me on that journey.
Brilliant. So we're talking about the mid-80s now. It is around, very young, you're still very young, and here you've decided to set up your own consultancy at a very young age in a space where I'm now going to use the word which we know as diversity, inclusion, DEI, which of course has had a backlash. But was there a term, was there language like we have right now at that time in 1983? Did organizations understand what you were trying to achieve?
Oh, yes, I think organisations understood what I was trying to achieve, and not just me personally, the people working all over the place. Our phrase was equal opportunities. Okay. That was sort of the forerunner, and then and then it became equity, and we did things like anti-racist practice, and the language evolved. The goal was always the same, which was parity and inclusion and so on. So yeah, people understood what I was trying to do. Whether they agreed with it or not, that's another thing. But because I wasn't the only one. It's not like there's one person doing this. There were lots and lots of people I decided to join. In effect, lots of other people working in all kinds of other places, finding our way to make a difference.
Wow, in 1983, I mean, I just look back and think 1983 seems like a long time ago, but it's actually not that long ago either.
No, and now, of course, when we're talking around Section 28, we're a bit further along from there. We're 80 something, 88 something. Yeah, 88. Yeah. So we're further along there, and I'm sort of settled. I feel like a grown up now.
Okay, and then Femi, then AIDS happens, right, around
Then
that
AIDS
time.
happens.
Yeah, and so how can you give us again a story, your story around AIDS and how you managed it, and what was your time like during that period?
Um, I think that might have been a bit earlier. We'll need to check those dates because my sense of AIDS and HIV was a little bit earlier. And I was a volunteer on Switchboard. And we started getting these calls. I remember we knew so little about it.
Yeah,
And I will always remember a call I got from this guy said, I've heard this thing about the gay plague. What is it? And I said, well, have you been to America? He said, yes. I said, did you take poppers? He said, no. I said, oh, you'll be fine. Because we knew so little
yeah,
that we were associating it with a particular kind of practice. And that practice was the bathhouses of, a particular city. And that thing about correlation isn't always causal.
yeah, yeah,
Who were using poppers
yeah.
seem to be the ones who are, most likely to be affected by this thing.
Femi, sorry, I'm interrupting, just so that we can set this in context. It's 1981 when the whole
That's
AIDS.
it. There we
Yeah,
are. So
you're right. So
than that.
1981, then your 1983 happens, and then of course the
Yeah,
Section 28 in 88. Sorry, so I
that's
just
it.
wanted to set that. Yeah. So
That's a better part for me. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, go on.
So so I'm on Switchboard. There are 80 volunteers running. I wonder if it still is at that time. I think possibly the only 24-hour helpline on the planet. So we are taking calls from all over the planet. We have amazing volunteers who later go on to start all kinds of initiatives, the National AIDS Manual, Heritage Trust, and so on. But at that time, we're all volunteers together. And we're learning. We're learning as fast as we possibly can. And this is another area. I talked about being a feminist and being supportive of heterosexual women, even though, so things like pregnancy testing and custody of children never affected me as a lesbian with no children and, no risk of pregnancy. But I was there. That's what we did. And this was another example. AIDS was another example of where this thing doesn't directly affect me, although people did talk about whether lesbians were vulnerable and came up with dental dams and various other bits and pieces. In reality, the group most affected by that were sexually active gay men. But the lesbians were right there.
Yeah.
Right there in the organisations, on the helplines, and offering very practical support, like taking food around, as well as, advocating for people, supporting things like London Lighthouse. Because that's the best way to get change for everybody, is to find either common ground or just to find a way where there's a similarity between what it is we're looking for, and to work together on it.
Yeah, because I wasn't here. Of course, I was in India at that time, and I was very young at that time. I didn't even know about AIDS until I was a little older, And I remember maybe 4 or 5 years later, newspaper headlines talking about AIDS in our main publication in India, and that's how I got to know about it. But I was scared. My mom, because I was going to study in the U.S., I'd won a scholarship, and everybody in my house was saying, "Don't go. You're going to get AIDS." That is how they put this thought in your head, and like you didn't even know. Nobody knew what it was in India. They thought it was something that you got infected with, and yeah. So anyway, so that was that time, and I'm just trying to get the history of. So we've covered 83, we've covered 88, Section 28. Were there any other big moments in your life when you felt the trajectory change and say, okay, here now there's a new thing that we need to push?
I don't remember sort of big steps after that. The big ones had been, probably marriage and, the rights.
Yeah.
When first we were able to register a partnership, first of all in London, that was another initiative from the Greater London Council. And that was almost like a sort of test run to see if it would work. And then, I think that was another big step, because it meant that there was going to be formal, if not quite legal, but recorded recognition of our relationships. So that first year that happened, the relationship I was in was recorded, and that felt pivotal to me. I almost felt, well, that's it then, sorted, But it isn't just about us. So there were obviously campaigns around the age of consent for gay men, where once again we're like, okay, which banner are we carrying now today? What telephone call do we have to make to say that this was badly portrayed on a TV program or something? So there were, yes. So there was the age of consent for gay men lowering, and the that recognition. Those are the two big pivotal things for me.
Brilliant. And over time, do you think that has impacted our community by allowing us the opportunity to choose, basically?
Well, of course, that first registration then led to civil partnership and then marriage. And all of those things, I think, have had a huge impact on our day-to-day lives. I mean, if we think about, being able to formally say this person is my next of kin and have that unassailable by staff in various institutions. If I think about some lived experiences where older members of our community have ended up in care homes and their partners have not been recognised and treated very shoddily. Of course, those milestones are important because they affect, every day, sometimes the minutiae of our everyday lives.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We held a roundtable at the House of Commons recently on the 5th of May, and we brought in campaigners, activists, whoever were able to attend. And I hope you attend the next one. We've got a couple more lined up. And what came through, apart from isolation and loneliness and housing issues, was this big thing on care homes, the
Yes.
abuse in care homes, that the system is broken and that the system is not geared for our aging queer population. And we are hoping that collectively we are able to change that and rebuild the system. So with all the fight that you've done, I'm using the word fight very loosely, and I'm not saying you actually fought, but fight, this activism that you've done, when you see elders speaking this and saying that I'm scared, I'm going to go back into the closet, I'd rather die than go into a care home. I've 70, 80, 90-year-olds saying that. How do you feel about it, and does it make you angry?
Anger's never really been part of my kind of useful lexicon. I've not really bothered with that either as a word or as a concept. I mean, I'm quick to anger. Yeah, granted. I hope I'm equally quick to kind of calm down a bit as well. No, determination is closer. And I always say, look, come on, here you are in your 70s, 80s, 90s maybe. We are the ones who did this. And even if we weren't active, we are the ones that survived it. We can do it again. We can do it again.
Yeah, I love it. I think that was the general consensus in the room that day, that we are all leaders, we are all fighters. We've come here. Why should, yeah, we're survivors. Why should why should we be dismissed by somebody else?
Yeah.
Like, that. So no, I love this. I love Femi. I love how you just keep showing this positive energy. I think it's so important for us. I'm going to come to this question that was raised a few days ago by someone, and someone said to me, because I'm doing a lot of work in the older queer space now, they said, how are you going to manage this infighting that we have in the community? And younger people are fighting with other younger people, and older people are fighting with other older people, and then older people are fighting with younger people. And how are you going to manage this infighting that runs? And I didn't have an answer, because like you, I'm not fighting. I'm doing my work. I'm putting my head down staying in my lane and doing whatever I can do. So do you see that as well? And do you see that has changed over the years, or it is something that's always been around?
The concept, the phenomenon, I believe, has always been around.
Okay.
So, I remember being on the management committee of the London Lesbian and Gay Centre, and us having disagreements about whether or not we were going to allow the Leather Queens to have slave auctions in the, where a guy dresses up as an enslaved person or whatever. Are we going to allow them to meet in the Lesbian Gay Centre? Are we going to let S&M dykes to do this, that and the other? So that phenomenon of these people are okay, those people aren't, they're not part of our movement, I've always been aware of. So I recognise it. What do we do about it? I think we do the same as what I've always done. There's always been an opportunity to maintain our autonomy. I always had that. That the expression we use now is find your tribe, right? My tribe's over there, right? The dykes are there. If all else fails, I'm going back over there where the dykes are. But in the meantime, I will work with. So I've progressed, right? So I worked in women's aid with women's stuff. I've worked with lesbian only stuff. At one point, my flat was entirely lesbian only. Even the postman had to stop at the end of the road. You can't come to my balcony. I've worked with alongside and with gay men, that politically and in my life, and none of those people have ever said, Femi, we resent you going off to the Black Lesbian and Gay Centre project. We don't think you should work in women-only stuff. We're glad that you're here with us, and we think it's fine for you to go and do that. And that was reciprocated, and I intend to continue to be the same. So I'm currently the chair of Queerwell. Queerwell is an intergenerational organisation. It is queer. It's not lesbian. I'm lesbian. I'm a dyke. It'll always be that. But we talk of. I see. When we use this phrase LGBTQIA+, it's an umbrella. Yeah. And we all need to be prepared to help. If we see people being treated unfairly, if we see things being unequal, we all need to be prepared to stand in the way of that inequality. And what we ask in return is respect for autonomy. Right? So I will come out on the front line with you, I'll do that. But when I go back right to my posse, I expect you to go, here we are, I'll clear the way for you. Go back to your posse. And I think that's the way forward. Work together, preserve your autonomy.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And how is it with Queerwell? Because I know that they came out with a report which was quite painful to read, actually, on the
Yes.
the whole mental health space, and how our community in particular really has difficulty on a day-to-day basis.
Not much
And
changing there then, is there? I mean,
yes,
it's
no,
better than it used to be, but there's still a lot to be done. We're
yeah,
working a lot with public health. We're working a lot in the corporate space to help people with our wellness in the workplace offer, to help organisations support their staff who are part of our communities. We're also working within our communities. So we have Sunday Sanctuary, where people can come along and drink tea, eat cake, go to workshops, things like that. We can and we do things like organise professional support sessions where that's needed, and we're working to make sure that that's free if we can, or what people can afford. And that's how I see the best way to support our community at the moment. You'll still find me in the lesbian clubs when I go out, but at the moment, I spend a lot of time working with Women's Aid, which is an entirely women's organisation providing services by and for women. But where the greatest need is, that's where I like to be,
yeah.
really. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and there is a lot of need in the mental health space for sure. And I'm not surprised you're, a chair of Queerwell, because they do amazing work. I've been to their Sunday sanctuary. Tim's doing amazing work. Nicola and I have done our own workshops there. And I encourage anyone listening to this, please go and attend the Sunday sanctuary, or just run a workshop there for people. It's amazing to see how much it benefits. It really, there's a tangible benefit. You can see it.
Yeah.
And if you, yeah, and in the caption later, we will put in details for Queerwell and the Sunday Sanctuary if anybody wants to attend those workshops and spaces. I
That'd be
want to,
really good. And if you don't need the services, if you think, okay, I'm fine, actually, I don't need a mental health service, why don't you go to the website and donate? How's that?
what's the website? It's queerwell. Nicola, can you
Queerwell.com,
find
yeah.
.com,
Yeah.
is it www.queerwell.com? And on that note, I've just got a couple of other questions, and I'm sure we can get some comments from you as well in terms of the word queer, because you did mention LGBTQ as an umbrella term, and we mentioned the word queer. How does it sit with you? Because I know there's a whole lot of connotation to the word queer from the old times.
There was also bad connotation with the word lesbian, which was seen as a mental health issue, like homosexuality. Like when you buy a new chair and you sit and you think, oh, I don't know, not sure about this. And after a while, you kind of break it and you think, oh, well, it'll do. Yeah, I can live with that. Queer as a word, when I was a kid, queer was something strange. Not about people. People go, queer is a 9-bob note. Now, I don't know if that vernacular is lost on you, but, there wasn't no such thing as a 9-bob note. Queer didn't mean a good thing. So I because I'm old school, and because I have that quintessentially English upbringing when I was young, it wasn't a cloak I was happy to take on. But that doesn't mean that it should stop me doing the work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And so, I've seen things like the evolution of the Lesbian and Gay Film Festival through Flair, become a queer film festival. That's still my festival. I still camp out at the South Bank, throughout that week. Anyone says to me, what are you? I'll say I'm a lesbian. That's it.
Excellent.
And if someone
Excellent.
says it's queer, I'll go, I'm not going to leave the space then. Okay, this is a queer space. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because we do get a lot of people commenting on the word queer, and the older queers, some of them, not all of them, do say to us, "You obviously haven't done your research well enough." And it isn't. The whole idea is for us to reclaim these words which have negative connotation, including
Or
the
at least
word lesbian.
understand. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, reclaim or at least understand. I mean,
yeah,
the way I see it is, I know, for example, if an old lady calls me a lovely coloured girl, which sometimes they still do, I I understand what they mean. I'm not going to take the mantle on for myself personally. I understand what they mean, and in that day and at that time, I'll use it. And I feel like that about queer. It's not the term I would give myself. I understand the context within which people use it, and I'll march under that banner because I know what we're trying to achieve.
brilliant. And Femi, we talk about color, right? Because I can't get away from it either. When I wake up, I'm the same color no matter what, and so are you. So has it ever come in the way of your activism, or the way you look at the world, or the way you think the world looks at you?
Those are three different things. So has
Yeah.
it got in the way of my activism? It's fueled my activism. How the world's looked at me? Absolutely, absolutely. Because from the little tiny things, like people being astonished that I'm attending something. Why are you here? It's not soul night, they say outside the club. So it affects how the world looks at me. It means that sometimes, less so now, I was invisible to other lesbians wandering around happening. I mean, it was a combination of being black and also being a bit girly a lot of the time, once I got through my butch feminism phase. The people don't expect you to look like that. You must have had it
Yeah.
to be that group and be this thing. Sometimes that's quite helpful in the work that I do. If people don't see that you fit a stereotype, it's harder for them to pigeonhole you. They're more likely to be open to what you say. So, just work it.
It's interesting. It's interesting because, yeah, in my case, I'm like said, you're an Indian middle-aged woman, mother of kids. You can't be a lesbian. So people tell me what I should be. So, and I'm
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
yeah,
forget
okay,
that.
yeah, yeah, fine. If that is what you think, that's fine too. And I'm coming to the end of our session. And like I said, younger people, what do you think? I want to frame this right. When you think about legacy, because some of us will leave a legacy, and I know you are leaving a legacy. You have already created a legacy. So what do you hope younger queer generations, especially the Black queer people, will carry forward from your trials and triumphs?
I hope that the younger generation, well, I see them doing it anyway. They are still working to support one another, which is great. That's the first thing, look after ourselves. Secondly, to continue to look critically at the wider society and to try and shift it in a direction that makes a difference to us. Do things that change the way people think, tackle what's taught. Do things that change our lived experience, that actually improve day to day experiences of our communities, and do things that change social policy, really
Yeah.
campaign and agitate and lobby till we start to see things even closer to the thing that we're looking for or way we think the world should be. And some of you are doing it. So thank you for those of you that are.
Brilliant. And Femi, everything matters, right? Every bit helps. Every bit matters. And I say the same thing to everyone. Do whatever you can. If you need to put a photo of yourself and with a flag, do that. Doesn't matter. Don't worry about what other people think or say. Every bit matters. And any final words of wisdom? And I've really, really enjoyed talking to you. Anything you would like for our audience to take away?
I don't know about wisdom, but my final words are, work out what you want to be and then strive to help the world find a place for you to fit into it.
Femi, it's been wonderful talking to you. Really, I mean, I'm so glad our paths crossed, and they've crossed a few times because
Yeah,
I kept
recently.
thinking we have to bring Femi on our podcast, and I know that I just have this feeling, Femi, that we are going to do lots together, and I don't know why, but just that feeling inside, and I hope that we will do something
I look
collaboratively. And
forward to it. I hope we meet again in cooler place and a cooler time.
Oh, yes, definitely cooler place. And on that note, I am going to say thank you to Femi. Wonderful, right? Audience, whoever's listening, please remember you can share this podcast, you can share your feedback, you can make comments. Make sure we get as many people as possible to watch this on YouTube, to listen to this on Spotify and Apple. And to all our audience, always, always thank you very much for your kindness and your support. And like I said, conversations like these remind us why older queer voices matter so deeply. They hold history, resilience, courage, and lessons that future generations need to hear and carry forward. So, thank you to everyone listening to the Older Queer Voices podcast. Please continue to support and amplify. Thank you to our outreach partners. We've got quite a few people who promote this online, and thank you to all of them. And thank you to my wife and partner, Nicola Fenton, who does all this in the background. And all I do is talk, 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 talk. And until next time, see you, everyone, and take care of yourselves.